So my name is Henry. I'm an addict and alcoholic. Um, Usually speaking, I go through phases where I get like incredibly anxious before doing it and really confident. We're more on the anxious end of things, so we'll see how this goes. I want to first qualify with a few things that I do when I share in person. I have a sponsor. My sponsor knows he's my sponsor. My sponsor also has a sponsor, so like he didn't just make up the 12 steps on the spot, which is really helpful for my sobriety. My sobriety date is June 1st, 2020. I do service locally, and I don't have any sponsees as of yet, but my sponsor's been talking me into being starting to pursue that a little more. I also try to not focus so much on qualifying of myself as an addict or alcoholic and how I got here, but I'll give a quick rundown. Something that I experience whenever I use a drug or drink is this sensation of craving, which is the idea that when I have my first drink or drug, I want to do 1,000 more. It can be beer or Xanax bars, or actually the other 20 substances that I consider my favorite ones. And once I stop, I really cannot stop. Once I start, it just goes off and I wake up in weird fucking places with tattoos of things I don't know that I got with really kind of scary stories. I look at my history of use, and I was going to kind of dig into it with this year too, that when I look at getting sober, I really used to justify that I had every excuse not to. I took my first drink at, I'm going to say 13 years old. I always say 14, but realistically it was probably 12, and 13 sounds a little more well-adjusted. So we're going to go with 13. And so prior to that, I really struggled with anorexia as a kid. I almost died from it. And around this time, I'm dating this really cool girl. And she's like, hey, you know what also makes you feel really good without the level of effort of drinking is alcohol. And I remember the first time that I did that, my dad had a handle of vodka in the pantry, and I kept chugging as much as I could, and I probably got about like 25% of it down. And I felt really sick, and it wasn't the most ideal, like, logic feeling, but I had never felt so more at peace. It was the warmness, rushed through me, and I felt, I won't say that I was always irritable, discontent and restless, but, and a lot of people who share will claim that they had this like childhood of knowing they were different. I struggled with mental health as a child, but I didn't have these very big feelings of difference. But I will say that when I drank for the first time, I felt relief and fast, really intense relief. And I wasn't even really conceptualize the intensity of how much that relief really would play out in my life down the road. A year later, at 14, I already had been doing opiates. I also found out that when you combine substances like alcohol and opiates, you actually feel more relief, and it's like half the work. By the time I was 15, I had managed to overdose, and I had been bouncing out of psych wards. I'm trying to think. I did this like 8-month long stint in treatment where I was like at McLean, and I was on like some main character Hot Boy shit, like in the same, where all these books were written. I was on the same ward, and I thought I was the best shit in the world. They brought me to an NA meeting at that time, and it blew my fucking mind that I could just go to places and buy drugs like that. I wouldn't even have to like try to make connections. I could just go to NA meetings and buy Percocet. Like that was a life changer for me. And that's kind of how my using escalated. At 16, I got out of institutions, and I lasted about 8 months until a very tragic and traumatic event happened in my life. And I had managed to be a dry drunk, like partying to like almost dying every other weekend up until that point. But when things got hard in my life, I had already had this level of habit, behavior, and craving that made substance abuse the best way out for me. It was able to reinvent my identity around it. I was able to get into like the scene a little bit. It was a very intense thing. And what mirrored the craving was the idea of belonging. And what I really liked about belonging was if everybody used around me and they were so stupid that I would belong by default because we're like doing depressants or alcohol. Like nobody's really much of an intellectual, really drunk. So I felt right at home. because there was no critical thought. And I last around that time, and then I get sent to like, and Brett, I also prior to that got sent to punitive stuff too. I did a wilderness boot camp where we weren't allowed like shelter or food really for 90 days. And I shit in the woods and said how sorry I was. Sometimes at the same time, mostly not. And then I got sent to this ranch-like place. But although it probably deserved what it said on paper, it was like, again, another traumatic event happened. I saw a lot of sexual and physical abuse. Most of my close friends are there now are either homeless, suicide, or drug addicts. I still like process a lot of what happened there. I lived there for 8 months straight, you know, sleep deprivation, isolation chambers, a really intense, abusive place that was kind of marketed as a kind of like get well scheme. And we weren't allowed communication with our parents. So like there was no way of getting out of that. And I managed to stay sober out of that whole time, mostly because I was like held down and kept sober. But I come home after that and I'm moderately confused is the best way to put it at where I am in life. And I find that the phenomenon of craving did continue to happen, which logically makes sense, right? Maybe, but then now I see it as I was kind of posed with this juxtaposition in life. I could, you know, be sober and deal with what had happened to me in a very healthy way, or I could become a SoundCloud rapper and get physically dependent on Xanax. And I kind of actually chose the SoundCloud rapper Xanax idea. It was a quick scheme that seemed to pay off. While that was budding, I was homeschooled in the woods of New Hampshire on like libertarian communes around this time too, which is kind of a quirky backstory. And my summers my parents would save up and go to Europe or different international countries. So the point being is that I had like a very non-school education. I did not know how to do school and I didn't even have a GED. So I'm trying to like do my SoundCloud thing on the side. I also, to some degree, that came a little later, but this idea, let me back up. This idea of SoundCloud came as something along this like longitudinal path of like, if things don't work out for me, I'm going to go off the deep end, right? So we have this one thing of like applying myself and working hard, but with this expectation that if things don't go my way, if I can't exert my control enough around the world around me, then I can do the opposite. It was this black and white moralistic thinking revolving around substance abuse, because substance abuse was the tool to allow me to cop out of any consequence or issue. And when we do this, I was able to get into college. I got my like GED, I self-taught, I got a full ride scholarship to a pretty good university in downtown Boston that would set me up for what my intentions of grad school were at that time. And I thought that I had been able to, you know, put this thing behind me. I had been in AA and NA before. It was a place that I would go if nobody else liked me and I wanted to get like pity and a pat on the shoulder and said I was doing a good job. I also didn't consider Xanax a drug, so I collected my year chip, like blacked out. So that was kind of fun. But I get to school on this full ride scholarship, thinking that I had mastered this, still with these theories that if things went wrong, this expectation, I could just cop out. And I was still using, but not at a heavy level. And things happen at school, like normal life stress. I met a girl. I got good grades, and then I got bad grades and good grades. And all of a sudden, this phenomenon of craving exists in a place that logically I know I can navigate if I'm not using those drugs and alcohol. And more than that, I know that what I'm dealing with is moderately normal. And we have that background of trauma stuff, but still, it's like substance abuse, I even could intellectualize at that time, would put me very much back. But I don't know how conscious of a decision it was for the first time. I started taking non-prescribed medication. I had a pill pusher of a doctor at the time. So that was a justification how I can moderate. If it was prescribed, it would be fine. 3 benzo scripts, a stimulant script a month, totally good. But if I took somebody else's substance that wasn't prescribed to me, it wouldn't be good. And I remember taking that first like puff of weed that I probably didn't even breathe in a lot because I hadn't smoked in a few years. And the phenomena of craving like just clicked in my head. And in 2 months, what was it? I mean, the whole school semester was just a shit show. Within 3 months, I was coming down from a Molly binge after living in a crack house during my finals. And then apparently my mom had to come pick me up because I was passed out on my dorm room floor from Xanax. I get home, I had to do a detox, and I had a suicide attempt because I wanted to take more Molly. Like, that was my thought process. I get out of the psych ward, and I managed to get back to my second semester at college. Believe it or not, the whole thing happens again. Luckily, COVID kind of saved my ass. I'm also okay academically, which the first semester was okay because I got my my fucking finals like pushed back, so I still got okay grades. In the last semester, because of COVID, I got perfect grades because there weren't anything called deadlines. But the issue kind of remained that I was going to crack houses, you know, doing Molly, drinking every day, just not being really like a cool guy generally. And I was also just such a fucking dick. And it really escalated. I come home now from these 2 semesters with all this like emotional baggage of institutionalization, budding alcoholism and addiction, probably at that full blown. And that's where my memory completely just stops. Around 3 months prior to June, I remember coming home, and then I remember waking up in the detox, realizing I just had like a 3 to 2 month bender that I have no idea what happened. And in this whole backstory, I know it's kind of convoluted and confusing. It is to me as well. And I think it actually kind of shows like what using feels like. It's just this general motion sickness and kind of piecing things together. Funny enough, this 2 to 3 year, in the 2 to 3 month blackout, I had a girlfriend that I still don't really know who she is. I had a SoundCloud career a little bit that I don't really remember. And apparently I dealt drugs for like 2 or 3 months that I also don't remember. I don't remember those 3 things because of the amount of drugs and alcohol I was using at the same time. I wake up in detox and I'm startled, to say the least, a little alarmed to figure out that this is not my own bed that I'm waking up in and I'm coming out of an overdose. And that is what landed me into the year of sobriety that I am in now. I started piecing together kind of what had happened. I realized that I was homeless. My parents had kicked me out, that I was very dependent on substances. Like I would have to be weaned off over a month because of how much I was taking. And I was also told that 2 weeks earlier, I was having symptoms of like delirium tremens and just doing batshit crazy stuff in terms of how physically I was from the withdrawals. And I really don't consider this my most intense rock bottom. I've had more emotional or physical worse periods, but I was really sick and tired of winding up in places like this. There's the phrase, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. It wasn't the most drastic rock bottom, but I was really, really frustrated that I was here again, thinking that my self-will would have, I thought self-will was going to get me back there. That was it. And I thought that I could over-intellectualize, I could find a therapist, I could do everything reliant on myself to get better, and I was still there. And I think that's really when I started embracing step 1. I would do step 1 with the sponsor months later. But the idea of like this, whatever I'm doing isn't working, and I myself cannot dig out of this hole. I spent some time at the psych ward, making some cool friends. They were kind of chill. I'd done it before, but at the end of the day, it was still a psych ward, and the time was creeping when I was going to get discharged in homelessness. I scheme a little bit. I'm like, okay, can I go to a rehab? Not really intending to get sober, but I'm like, I'm powerless. Definitely the encroaching. It's winter right now. I'll do the rehab thing. And I did that. Wait, no, it's summer, but whatever, because I was thinking the following. Regardless, rehab to stay in a home. And I start hearing the message of AA, which I very, very resented. I refused to actually take part in AA for the 30 days I was at the rehab on a religious grounds. And I threatened to call the state because of their Judeo-Christian leanings, and cited, civil law arguments that I was okay at. And they're like, whatever, dude, just do your fucking thing. So it was really like rantings of a madman, but not as smart as I would have liked it to sound. And I'm still kind of running around this rehab, trying to refute sobriety generally. And then it comes time to leave the rehab because my insurance stopped covering it, and I had to go to this fucking like IOP out in Western Mass. And there's like these levels of powerlessness. At first, I like understood I was intellectually power over this thing called drugs and alcohol, my ability to keep ruining my life. But I still was like, okay, I'm powerless, but like AA isn't the way that I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna like go do DMT or like fucking something like just way cooler than AA. And out in Western Mass, I start having these really intense experiences that like I am not the shit that I thought I was. And more than not being the shit, I'm actually kind of a fucking loser. I'm on PUA. I'm like incredibly overweight. I'm sleeping all day, and I just cry a lot. Oh, also I liked Marlboro Reds, which didn't really help my whole situation. The breathing thing didn't help. And I finally admitted, okay, I'm going to go to my first meeting after being receptive to it. And I get to the meeting. I'm not going to say a lot of things changed in my head about what it could do for me, but I became willing to go to another one, no matter how much I hated the first one, because at the end of the day, I looked around and these people who said they had like 15, 20 years of sobriety did have that sobriety. And that was about it. I just wanted to fucking stop drinking and drugging. So I start going, I'm going, and I do that for like 2 or 3 months. I'm not participating in the steps. I had a temporary sponsor. His name Tim. I think he died a few months ago, either from COVID or old age, maybe both. But I had read up to the point of the book of powerlessness with him. I was like intellectually able to do that. And then it became time to go out of that halfway house and go to Boston. I had just a backpack of what I had on my back, and I just fucking did it. I was stuck in Western Mass, and I couldn't seem to work the steps, and I was gonna try to just fucking make it in Boston. So I show up in Boston at the shitty halfway house that I hung out in. That is probably resentment I have. And I started going to meetings, and the Boston AA started really sticking. I heard these things about what they had in their life now, and they had worse circumstances than I did, which in my head wasn't even a comparison. I was like, they have more of an excuse to drink and they're still doing this. I met like people who are like moderately kind of cool, which I started hanging out with, and I started embracing this idea that where I'm at in the moment isn't working. I'm not really liking myself. I go to bed with this intense level of anger and self-hatred, and like nothing seems to relieve this. I hang out for there, and I finally just find a sponsor. I went to this home group for like a month or two, and I picked a guy that I wanted what he had, and not materially at all. He was very quiet at meetings. When he spoke, he made sense and talked about the steps, and he didn't kind of participate in any drama or confusion. It was very straight to the point, and he talked about his sponsor and what he understood the steps. And I was like, if anybody's going to do this, that's the person I'm going to go for. And if it doesn't work, I'll drink then. But like, this is something I can do.